Buenos días, mi nombre.
Good morning. My name is Crispino, and I'm a member of the research and development team of GeneXus. I work on the iOS generator mainly, and today I'm going to make a presentation on what's new in the platform. This is a presentation we make every year. Every year, Apple is releasing something new. Last year, they were going to release the watch, and we knew that we would be able to develop applications, but we didn't have the hardware yet. The previous year it was iOS 7, and the title was the greatest change since launching the iPhone, because this version required a lot of interface. And 1 year before, we talked about the iOS 6. But this year there has been a change. In June, Apple announced an OS for the watch, and last year they announced the new iPhones, and they said that the Apple TV would also have the possibility of developing applications. So it has OS, which is called TV OS. So this year we should say Apple platforms, what's new. When we were preparing the presentations, however, we realized that talking about the three platforms in one presentation would be too much. So yesterday, Fabian spoke about Watch OS and TV OS, and my presentation made a complete turn, and again, I will come back to iOS 9, what's new in the platform. As I said, in this year there were two relevant events in Apple. Firstly, the Conference of Developers, in which they announced the new version, as well as the new OS for the Apple Watch. And in September, they announced two new models of iPhones, the 6S and 6X Plus, and an iPad Pro with a bigger screen, as well as the Apple TV, which has an operating system too. I'm going to describe the functionalities of the iOS 9. These functionalities don't really have a connection between themselves. So I'll show you exactly where I am. I would like to talk about numbers first. iOS 9 was released on September 16, and today, or yesterday afternoon, the percentage of adoption in the devices was 54%. There is a 36% percentage we have iOS 8, and the rest of the devices have a previous version, mostly version 7. Before the iOS 9 was released, iOS 8 adoption rate was 91%. One of the features of iOS 9 is it runs in the same devices than iOS 8, so very soon iOS 9 will reach a similar percentage. This is the adoption graph, the day in which iOS 9 was released, and how it hasn't stopped growing. We see in blue iOS 9, iOS 8 in blue, and yellow the others. With regard to GeneXus, the version that is released at the moment is Evolution 3 Update 4. This version works with the SDK of iOS 8, but we're working on the Salto version and the Evolution 5 in order to be able to support iOS 9. However, at the moment, all of the versions function properly with iOS 9, but now we need a new version that will be released in the coming days. I'm going to talk about 6 points. Firstly, I'd like to highlight some of the changes made with regard to the end users. They affect the end user, but not us as developers. Firstly, one of the applications is installed by default. It's the Notes. And in the past, it only allowed text, but now in this format it is possible to add images, to draw on the note, to have checklists. Then another application is the iCloud Drive. iCloud is the documents cloud of Apple's, and the applications can store the documents there. With iCloud, what we can do is see all of the applications that we have in the cloud. In the past, each application had its own documents and had access to these documents, but now we have a centralized place where we have all of the documents. Another change for the user is a virtual keyboard. In previous versions, there was a bar on top of the keyboard with suggestions for words, but now there are suggestions like undo or mark text in bold. And in the iPad, the keyboard becomes a kind of trackpad in order to make the selection easier. And then, still with regard to this first point, Siri is better installed. It has more information providers. You can consult, for example, the results of the sports games, and Spotlight is also improved on the screen, as you see. It shows us a list of our most frequent contacts and the most frequently used applications, suggestion of places where you can go for dinner, news, and search possibilities within the applications. With regard to changes in the operating system that affect us as developers, the first one is the support for multitasking. Apple has been careful in handling multitasking. There are many things that are not allowed, and these restrictions are significant for devices that have few resources. For example, the objective of not allowing the free execution of certain tasks is that the battery is not quickly consumed. However, in the new versions of the operating system, they always add a new support for multitasking. And in this version, what they added was the support so that you can have two applications running at the same time on the screen. This is the iPad that has a bigger screen, of course, and it has 3 modes. The first one is called Slide Over. You are running an application, and there's a floating application on one side that can be useful to consult some information. Then it disappears, and I continue executing the application on the background. The other one is Split View, and in this case, both applications are fixed on the screen. It can be an image that takes half of the screen, as you hear, or it can be 2/3 and 1/3 of the screen. These two multitasking modes in iPad can be supported by us. In GeneXus, when we define a panel, we also define different layouts. You just need to choose the adequate size according to what is being shown. The third multitasking mode for the applications that reproduce videos are picture-in-picture, a floating window that appears in the application. This new OS brings another application called app thinning. It's a way in which the applications are distributed. And it has 3 modes. Slicing, which concerns the resources with which the application is distributed, images, videos, audio. Bitcode, which concerns the code compiled in the various architectures, since each device has its own CFU architecture with variations, so it's necessary to distribute different binaries for each device. And then on-demand resources. I'll go back to each one. Slicing and bitcode are very similar, so I'll explain them together. In this image, we see in green the different architectures of the processors, and then we have the images, the audio in red, and other kinds of resources. When we distribute this application up to iOS 8, the whole package of the application went to the device, and obviously some things that were not needed went too, because in an iPad mini there are resources that we are not going to use. But now with app slicing, the application is published in the store, but when it is distributed to the device, the store only delivers the resources that can be needed. If it's an iPhone 6, for example, which requires a 3D density image, then the store will deliver what the device needs. In the case of on-demand resources, the classical example is games. There is a code for the application, of course, and several resources that are common for the whole application, and then resources that correspond to the level of the game. So what we do is the following. When the application is compiled in Xcode, we put together a whole package. In green, we see the binaries, and the other resources or kinds of resources are divided according to level. In the Xcode, we have the application, and we have to indicate certain things like the resources that can be downloaded on demand, but in the store they are separated. On the one hand, we have the shared resources, and on the other side, what is required for each level. And when the application is downloaded in the device, what is downloaded is what will be required at that point in time. No, the whole application won't be downloaded, therefore the downloads are much smaller. The levels will be downloaded as the user needs them. In GeneXus, these cases are a bit more difficult to analyze. So if you have any ideas of using the community, please let me know, because we still don't have a very clear scenario of how we would use it. With regard to the fourth point, another change that was made in iOS 9 was the application of transport security. This is a requirement with regard to the HTTP connections. Certain of the requirements are that the server can support TLS version 1.2, secondly that the connection cipher will forward secrecy, and that the certificates are signed with this SAH or SHA or better. If you don't understand this, don't worry, I don't understand it either. But the important thing is that this requirement had to be fulfilled by the server or on the side of the server. And anyway, we can distribute applications that have access to services that don't fulfill these requirements. But we have to determine which are the requirements that are not being complied with. Another thing that has to be checked concerning this feature of transport security is what we call URL schemes. These schemes are used in order to open certain applications. We have here different ways of opening applications, and I can define my own schemes for various applications. In the version 9, what is not allowed is to ask whether there is an application that can open everything. In GeneXus, we do it with interop can open. And what they want to avoid is that the applications can ask whether there are other applications that are installed. If we want to use this function, we have to declare which other URL schemes we are going to be using. This is GeneXus. We have 3 application query schemes. That's what I said about the URLs that we have to declare. It's a list of what we're going to use. And then allows arbitrary loads, which determines whether the security scheme is going to be used or not. And you can say that it's not going to be used, but what we don't know is for how long Apple is going to support this type of application. And finally, a list of domains that have exceptions that don't fulfill the requirements of what Apple asks for, as I explained before. And then there are several properties that have to be configured. Obviously, all this is going to be documented in the wiki. On September 9, Apple announced two new models, the 6S and the 6X Plus. They have the 3D Touch, which is a new hardware modality. And this feature measures the force of the touch. They decided to call it by a different name, and this feature leads to three modalities. Firstly, the application shortcut. When I put pressure on a certain application, I see a context of options that are relevant for this application. With the camera, for example, I can take a selfie. With the maps, I can see how to get home or put a certain place on the map, and with the messages, send a new message, etc. All this is already on the 9th version. Another functionality is called View Controller Preview. It is in all of the applications that are native in this phone. For example, in an email, if I have a list of mails, I can put pressure on a mail and this will show me a preview. If I release the touch, the email disappears, and if I pressure with more forcibly, then it is going to deploy the email. A third feature, in all of the controls that we have on the screen, we can detect this kind of touch. We can trigger a special event when we put pressure on the screen. So this is what we are going to be adding with GeneXus. It will be like programming a tap event or a swipe, so it won't. It will take some time, but we still have to define how we are going to model the other two cases, like the controller previews, etc. Last point, the search feature. iOS 9 has an API that allows the user to include the searches in the device, in Safari, for example. And here what we see is that the user is getting back a result in a certain format with an image, a title, a description. From the installed application, one is being brought from the installed application and the other one from the web. There are three ways of integrated with the search in the device, with three different technologies, and each one solves a different scenario. The first one is for the content viewed or created by the user. If it's a recipe, for example, a cooking recipe, if afterwards the user looks for one of the ingredients, the result is going to appear. The other technology is called Core Spotlight. It adds all of the content of our application, or all of the content that we want, to the search index of the device. This technology can be used together with the previous one. If I have my whole application in the index and the user is interacting with the application, I can make some results more relevant for the following search. And the last technology would be for the applications whose content is duplicated in the web. It's called web markup, and they are HTML tags that are added to the web pages so that the Apple search engine finds them and adds them to the index. There are some things that can be done directly on the basis of the results of the searches. This is a result that was captured, and the icon is a telephone because you can call directly after the result of the search, and this is indicated directly, or it may be reproduced as a video, or maybe you can get directions on how to get into a certain place. And the other thing that can be done is formatting. These stars are indicated with a special tag, and it shows the price or the number of review. It's metadata on the web page from which the result was extracted. All this makes sense if the results of the search allow us to go to the place in the application where we want to go. This applies, for example, to a recipe, and for this a technology called universal links is used, or it's also called deblinking. It existed already using URL systems, but now the HTTP supports have been added, and this makes sense because some of the results are going to be brought from the web. So if the application is installed or if it's not installed, the information will come from the application or from the web. Firstly, the application has to declare which are the URLs that are going to be opened, and secondly, there has to be a file in the website saying that, in fact, the application is allowed to open the URLs that correspond to the site. In GeneXus, we are still seeing how we are going to integrate these searches. We want to do it as in a similar way as the full-text searches, but we still have to define how we're going to do it. So to sum up, iOS 9 has several functionalities. Some of them affect us as developers, others are required by Apple, like the app transport security, and others will be demanded by the users, like the multitasking in the iPad, or search integration, or 3D touch. The good thing is that with GeneXus you don't need to worry too much about the underlying technologies. You just need to make the applications as you do it normally. So these are a couple of resources if you want to have more detailed information. Thank you very much.